Oil is a huge boon for the Texas economy. In fact, how many billions of dollars did we have in surplus because of the great oil and gas environment out there? Why is Texas half the price of the electricity than the other states? It's because they have a balanced grid. And so when we take a look at the US, and as this article points out, that Robert points out, we are looking from net importer to net exporter for right now. The US was importing 12.5 million barrels of oil and finished products per day. At that time, drop in oil prices translate to major savings. But in 2025, the picture. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Energy News Beat podcast. This is the weekend edition. It has been a crazy week here on the news desk. The staff is picking out the best stories of the week, and we are off and rolling. Have a great Saturday. If you've written a book, I want to visit with you. If you're a politician and you're getting into politics, if you're trying to run against rhinos or you're a Democrat and you think you know energy, reach out. We want to talk to you on the podcast, and I want to give Steve Reese and everybody over there at Reese Energy Consulting. Go to reeseenergyconsulting.com. They are phenomenal. If you want to buy a load of LNG, or if you want to buy oil and gas, or if you're an AI data center and you want to scratch in your head going, where do I put a data center in the United States? Talk to Steve. And thank you all. Enjoy the show. Have a great time. Hey, let's start with our buddy David Blackmon. What a cool cat he is. Reconciliation permitting reform will make America big again. I'll tell you what, this is really critical because either we're going to have low cost energy or we're not going to have low cost energy. And the only way to get there is through the regulatory issues. And he outlines it really well. NEPA, which was the National Environmental Policy Act in 1970, I believe. Yes, in 1970, with good intentions, has morphed into a bureaucratic quagmire. Environmental reviews can drag on for years, serving as fodder for endless litigation from activist groups. Take the Keystone XL pipeline, canceled after a decade of NEPA-induced delays. I think if we can get this done, and what he's talking about is putting it into the bill for funding through reconciliation rather than have to go through this good news, bad news thing. I think if Congress would actually do their frigging job, we wouldn't have to go through this shenanigans. But I think it's one way to do it.
Yeah, and reconciliation has always confused me. And basically, as a layman's terms, what reconciliation is it's a way for basically is Congress has the power of the purse. So if you want to spend money, you've got to go through Congress. It's one of the interesting parts about what Doge is doing. And I think why there's a lot of pushback on Doge, because it's coming from the executive branch and not necessarily Congress. How can you get rid of funding that Congress has approved? And that really screams, well, Congress shouldn't have approved it in the first place. But
Congress is not doing their job, so
we'll leave that we'll leave that elsewhere. But basically what reconciliation allows is for an expedited process in order to consider bills that would implement policies that go within the congressional budget. Basically, it's a way to almost streamline the whole, because we haven't passed a budget in 20 years. I think Bill Clinton, ironically, was the last person that actually passed a budget. More and more sounds like a Republican every day. If you go back and listen to the stuff he talked about in the mid-90s, it's kind of funny.
It's even Hillary,
where it's like
Hillary and Bernie sounded a lot like President Trump. They got the clips that are comparing them. It's hilarious.
Yeah. Well, in Clinton's defense, he did balance the budget. So, but we'll leave it. We'll leave it there. We will leave it there. But the point is, so in all of this, reconciliation can be used for good, can also be used for bad. Specifically within, and what David Blackmon's bringing up is within this NEPA policy, which if you're in the mining space, you know about NEPA is not your enemy, but it's your quagmire. You'll spend years and years in these environmental reviews about sagebrush grass and making sure that you don't step on a squid in the middle of Idaho. And finally, after 10 years, you'll get a final ruling from NEPA, and boom, you can build a mine. Now, some of this is good, as I like what David Blackmon points out, that while when this was enacted in 1970, there was great reasons for it, and it was a good bill, much like the Clean Air and Water Act. When it was enacted in the mid-70s, it was a great thing. We needed it. I mean, you could light the Ohio River on fire, and it would burn because of all the stuff you were pumping into it. Now, is that what we need today? Well, maybe what worked today maybe doesn't work 10 years ago or 20 years ago. What worked 20 years ago doesn't work today. It's not to get off track here, but it's a little bit of my argument with tariffs. Everyone says, well, they worked in 1913. Great. Well, let's just get rid of all the cars and we'll go back to the horse and buggy.
Did you say you're on crack? What?
No, I am not on crack.
You said, not to get off track. Oh,
yes, not to get off track. Some people might think I'm on crack, but no, it's just caffeine and water is usually what I'm consuming. But again, it worked in 1913. Okay, great. Well, let's just go back and let's go live in 1913 then. Let's get rid of the car. Let's go ahead and, let's get rid of plumbing and indoor plumbing. You can go use the outhouse outside if you want.
Where are you going with this? I'm not sure.
What I'm saying is, what he's bringing up is that the fact that when NEPA was enacted, it was good. And today it's bad. And so being able to use things like reconciliation to go after NEPA is critical, because we need to be able to be nimble with our laws. Laws shouldn't be static to a point. They should mold with what's going on. Now, obviously, there are some things like that are in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that shouldn't be as malleable, but some law that was passed in 1970 should be malleable to work with the times. And I really like what he's pointing out there is that, yes, this was good, but now it's bad, and here's how we got to go about changing it.
Cool. Why oil prices are not always good news. And I thought this was a great one from Robert Rapier. Oil is a huge boon for the Texas economy. In fact, how many billions of dollars did we have in surplus because of the great oil and gas environment out there? Why is Texas half the price of the electricity than the other states? It's because they have a balanced grid. And so when we take a look at the U.S., and as this article points out, that Robert points out, we are looking from net importer to net exporter for right now. The U.S. was importing 12.5 million barrels of oil and finished products per day. At that time, dropping oil prices translate to major savings. But in 2025, the picture is reversed. The U.S. is a net exporter of about 2.3 million barrels per day and oil refined products. When oil prices fall, the U.S. now loses more on its exports than it does on its imports. And I was like, holy smokes, that's a huge impact on the budget.
No, I mean, this is a great article when talking about the reason why low oil prices aren't always good. I mean, they are good from a cheap gasoline price. Now, there is a little bit of, the price of oil is not quite as tied as this article talks about to gas prices. If oil prices drop, you may not see gasoline prices drop as much as it used to be, mainly because we're a huge net importer of oil. And obviously net oil, or oil traded on the global market, trades at a premium. You have to add in transportation costs and add in all this other stuff to where it may not actually fallen out. We actually know that this article, I think, points out very keenly that falling oil prices actually worsen the U.S. trade deficit. Now, I was on vacation last week and I was having this talk with my brother, and I was just trying to get an answer to the question, do we have to be a net exporter? Obviously, there are certain things we need to export, energy, technology, things like that. But do we have to, on a net basis, actually be a net exporter?
What was your brother's response?
Well, he didn't really have one, because we just, no one knows. But you just hear from Paul Krugman that, we need to be a net exporter of everything. It's like, well, do we? We need to make sure we export the right stuff, but we may need to import certain stuff, because guess what? That's the free market working.
Well, Here's where I'm going to throw this ugly baby squirrel on our doorstep. And an ugly baby squirrel would look like in EPA regulations. Why have we not updated our refineries to run off of our own sweet light crude as opposed to having to blend and mix? We wouldn't even have to worry about importing oil per se if we didn't have to blend it in order to be able to run into our refineries. And now we are the light sweet crude being blended is our exports are down in oil because people don't have their refineries set up for that. So it's an EPA issue, and Lee Zeldin needs to make sure we get some new budgets and able to put better
Yep.
refineries that are better for the environment, and we wouldn't have that problem.
And obviously, the Jones Act makes it difficult to take oil. And I was actually having a really interesting conversation. I got a call a couple weeks ago from an old buddy of mine who now works at the Hawaii State Energy Department.
Oh my
And
goodness.
they get pounded with the Jones Act because they have to buy all their oil overseas. They are a 90% of their economy and energy is oil based, not even natural gas based, oil based. So the Jones Act kills them and is one of the big reasons why their
60%,
energy prices are so high.
63% of the electricity generated in Hawaii is by oil, heating oil, is
Mm-hmm.
basically what it is. It is the worst for the environment. Here
And
we
they get it
have
from the Middle East. They can even get
exactly.
it from America.
No, it's actually
Unbelievable.
disgusting.
It is. So this is a great article. I'd highly recommend everybody go checking it out. You can hit the description.
UN Maritime Agency slaps first time ever emissions tax on shipping in the latest money grab. I think that this is really pretty interesting when you consider that UN's International Maritime Organization held a meeting in London on Friday at which member nations agreed to impose the first global carbon tax, a fee of $380 per metric ton on greenhouse gases emitted by ships of certain and limit and $100 per ton beyond that. This to me is absolutely disgusting, is that all this carbon tax is going to do nothing to solve any kind of pollution. And Gregory Wrightstone is a great friend of the show. And if you sit back and take a look, CO2 is actually plant food. But let's go to the particles and the particulate matter that go into exhaust and those things. Those are pollution. The IMO estimated the new tax would bring about $10 billion per year into the organization's net zero fund for green energy transition. You know what that sounds like to me? Hang on. A slush fund for corruption. There is nothing that the UN can tell me that they've done good in the world right now. Carbon tax was a consensus agreement that did not seem to please anyone, is a line out of this article. There's a group of about 60 developing countries wanting the income from the carbon tax to go into a general climate fund, not a fund reserved solely for the shipping industry. Well, it's a shipping industry meeting run by the UN, which has been pilfering money and trying to actually cause global migration to take down the West. Well, doesn't make much sense to give this organization any more money whatsoever. So, with that, I think that the UN needs to be shut down financially. And I would even vote to throw it out of the United States. And some of our readers have said, keep them in the United States so that we can veto anything that they do. But if you're not a member, throw them out. But this brings up a huge point to President Trump. He's got to build up his ships because if the UN Maritime Agency gets involved in anything, you know that there are further regulatory issues possibly coming around down the corner. That's why there is a huge migration. And I've been watching the shipping new builds and everything else. LNG is coming on very strong into cruise lines and all of these other ships that are cargo carriers that are new builds being made and to use LNG as a fuel, which means LNG bunkering, and LNG is here to stay. It's also a lot better than just regular fuel oil. China halts critical exports as trade war intensifies. This story is from the New York Times, and China has suspended exports of a wide range of critical minerals and magnets. That's huge, threatening to choke off supplies and components of central automakers and aerospace manufacturers. Shipments of the magnets essential for everything from cars and drones, robots, and missiles have been halted at many Chinese ports while the Chinese government drafts a new regulatory system. This is very much a huge issue, and it does bring up a great point. We've got more minerals than we know what to do with. The regulatory process and the mining takes 20 years to get a mine operational because of regulations, but it's also the mining and processing business that China actually owns 90% of the market share for what we need in that mining processing of the material. We can get the materials elsewhere, but it's that processing that we've got to change. And I have to hand it to Robert the Builder on X. You can see in this article, China retaliates against tariffs by putting worse fortunes into cookies. Thought that was cute. But then I also have to hand it to Ananias. He says, he's got a report out there. Unias says the U.S. relies heavily on rare earth imports. And you can see that 70% of our rare earth minerals come from China, but they also 13% comes from Malaysia, Japan, Estonia, and 6% come from others. So we do rely on them, and there's a lot of things that we rely on. I think that we will see by the end of the month China caving in, or they are going to retaliate much more of this. Rare earth antimony, which is we need it bad for munitions and wartime things, 63%. Gallium and germanium, 54%. Graphite, 42%. That's used in a ton of stuff. Trade values of 378 billion in 2022 in critical minerals. So it's going to be pretty interesting.
Lower oil prices threaten Permian Basin growth. This is a great piece for my friends over at Rystad. I think, everybody is asking the question, okay, with this whole drill baby drill, are companies actually going to drill? And not just are companies going to drill, but at what price are they going to drill and hire? And everybody has their own idea. And some people use half cycle economics, some people use full cycle. And for those wondering, half cycle is just the cost of the well itself. Full cycle is including the road you had to build to go get there, the tank battery that you had to throw up, and all the corporate engineering time that you had to spend to get into that. And so most people, when they talk about break-even oil prices, they're using half cycle economics, which from my world of finance is a big no-no because everything's full cycle. I don't get, I can make something look good in a spreadsheet, but at the end of the day, the bank account does not lie. Okay. And so basically what Rystad has done is estimated the all-in corporate cash flow WTI break even for a new well in U.S. oil. Basically, these are the metrics. This is the lowest number for an all-in well that you're going to need. And I think something interesting that they did is let's just work through it here. Can we throw up this chart here on the screen? All-in corporate cash flow, WTI break-even prices for a U.S. shale oil plays. You've got wellhead break-even, your half-cycle economics, $32.50. Okay. Overhead. Now we're adding in a few more of that, what we would call full cycle stuff, $14.06. All right, so now we're at, $56, okay, or $46. Add in PV18. We got a discount. And one of the reasons why they do PV18 is they talk about in this article about the shift from Shale 3.0 to Shale 4.0 is really this idea of higher hurdle rates that are applied to new activity, meaning the historical kind of 10% discount rate probably is more like 18. That adds another $4.50 barrel. When you include these public oil and gas companies provide a dividend, you break that dividend down, it's about $8.50, per barrel or $8.50 to cover debt service. It's about $2.92. All that being is the all-in break-even cost is $62.50. And what are we trading at today? We are trading at 61.37. So the all-in break-even cost is higher than what is trading at now. So what that tells you is this: everybody who's running a rig is okay losing money. Now, this is a broad generalization. This doesn't apply to everybody, but if you are drilling a well in U.S. shale oil plays, you need to be cognizant of this chart. And what somebody like me on the finance side would say, we should expect a drop in U.S. oil production in 2025. And if we don't, that means people are just drilling wells for the fun of it. And okay, maybe you have a rig contract, maybe you have to drill this next 4-well pad, but keeping a continuous rig running in this environment, it's kind of incredible. And this is a great piece. Highly recommend everybody go ahead and read this via Rystad.
The steep learning curve America faces if it wants to return to the previous shipyard glory days. And we take a look at what the actual shipbuilding capacity is. The United States has numerous shipyards around various states. As of recent data, it has approximately 154 private shipyards actively engaged in shipbuilding that are very small. And there's only 4 public shipyards dedicated to naval vessel maintenance and repair. We're in a world of hurt. When you consider the number of vessels that China builds in a year is about 1,000, and we build 3. So you're talking a huge number of ships. Unbelievable. And we've got a list in here of all the different ones that are out there. But the article that's also in the story is from America's Shipyards. The stats around the surrounding steep learning curve that want to claw back any market share in shipbuilding are astonishing. But we are way, way behind. We are way, way behind. That's a cross between President Trump and Fonzie, so we'll just leave that alone. The U.S. accounts for less than 1% of global output. How do you go attack? You got 99% you can go after, but you're going to have to face a really big employed in shipbuilding. Today, it's around 1 in every 1,000. It's just amazing when you take a look at that chart. It is really amazing. And so one of the things that I was really kind of trying to bring up to this point, the U.S. Navy has nuclear reactors down to a science, and we could branch that expertise out into the commercial sector and keep the control and licensing under the U.S. military framework. What about reactivating the merchant marines and building an entire business process around selling a ship, but having the United States maintain ownership of that nuclear plant on that ship? Their LNG carriers are being built all over the place. So having a small nuclear reactor and a contract for 30 years to maintain it sounds like a pretty good deal because you have zero emissions. The United States has a trading partner, and you got the merchant marines reactivated and controlling this. I would say that would be some pretty cool things to think about. Instead of just creating ships that are going to be around for 10 years, 20 years, build a ship that'll be around for a long time, put a nuclear reactor in it, the environment's better, have the U.S. merchant marines maintain control of those reactors. Then you could even lease the ships out if you wanted to, or sign long-term contracts. I thought a bad little idea, but the steep learning curve America faces is about also all the workers, getting rid of the Jones Act, all the steel mills that go with it, all of the engine components. This is a huge undertaking. How to strike trade deals in record time. This story is from Wendy Cutler at foreignpolicy.com. She has some very interesting points, and I disagree with some of them, but I agree with some of her points as well, too. And I'd love to have Wendy on the podcast to have her go forth and describe some of her solutions and things. Her statement that the dollar is falling instead of rising, a defiance of a tariff theory, shows investors are losing faith in America. I totally disagree with that. And what we're seeing is more a shift in fundamentals. The EU and the UK are following a path to decouple from the US, and embrace China, while individual countries in the EU are looking to negotiate their own trade deals with the President Trump's team. If those trade deals line up like they appear, the EU may not have some real they may have some real stability issues, in the sale of the US dollar is through bond sales and currency holding for trade. It is too early to see what the dollar has fallen under. It's too early to see what it's doing because the dollar has actually been lower under COVID. And so Wendy points out, though, in her article, and she is the vice president at the Asia Society Policy Institute, countries around the world are scrambling to pull together their best teams and develop strategies and offers on trade negotiations. Thus far, the Trump administration has referenced a long list of requests from their foreign counterparts. And I think that President Trump is on the right track. And go for an energynewsbeat.com and take a look at the full rest of this story here. But I think Scott is doing a bang up job, Scott Basin, and he is really running around trying to solve the problem. We are seeing a right sizing in trade. President Xi is meeting and he's trying to work out more strength in Asia partners, and he's meeting with Malaysia. And you take a look at Malaysia, I've been looking up how much Malaysia is capable of drilling in natural gas and in oil. And you take a look at the amount of oil that Malaysia exports to China, and then the amount of oil that they are capable of producing and refining, and they're shipping a lot more oil to China than they are. So I think you just found one of the avenues for Iranian or Venezuelan or any of the other dark fleet oil going to China is through Malaysia, because the numbers don't add up. Don't have proof on that, but the numbers don't add up. And when the numbers in the oil market don't add up, you can generally find it on a dark fleet tanker somewhere.